The tile snapped under my knee as I held a receipt with my own name on it. I was still on the kitchen floor when Rebecca called from the hallway. "Don't forget the grout sample. The lighter one, not the cheap-looking one." Dust clung to the sweat on my forearms, and the sharp smell of thin-set mortar sat in the back of my throat. I looked around at the stripped-down room, cabinets off their hinges, wires hanging loose, painter's tape curling at the edges, and told myself this was what building a life looked like before it looked like a home. My name is Ethan Carter. I was 38, married for just under 2 years, and I had put $50,000 into a house that wasn't legally mine because I believed that marriage was bigger than a deed. Rebecca had bought the place 3 years before we met, a narrow 2-story Craftsman in Tacoma with dark green siding, old brass knobs, and floors that groaned like they remembered every argument ever held above them. She used to stand in the doorway with a coffee mug in both hands and say, "It never felt finished until you were here." Back then, I believed her. I worked as a project manager for a commercial flooring company, which meant I knew exactly how expensive everything was the moment a wall came down. The first estimate for repairs had made Rebecca suck in air through her teeth. Foundation work, water damage under the sink, rotten subfloor in the back bath, electrical updates that the inspector had somehow missed. She sat at the dining table with the report spread out, one hand pressed to her temple, and said she couldn't carry it alone. I remember the yellow light over the table, the hum of the refrigerator, the way her voice softened when she said, "I'm not asking because I have to. I'm asking because this is our future." I had $53,000 in savings then. 10 years of skipped vacations, used trucks, and packed lunches in plastic containers. Money I'd built slowly, paycheck by paycheck, because my father had lost a house once and spent the rest of his life warning me that the roof over your head could vanish faster than love. I moved $50,000 into our joint account 2 days later. She kissed me in the driveway with sawdust in my hair and called me her rock. The work started fast. Weeknights disappeared into hardware runs and YouTube repair videos. Saturdays smelled like cut pine, joint compound, and hot insulation. I replaced light fixtures, paid for a new water heater, covered the labor for the bathroom renovation, and ordered custom shelves for the den because Rebecca said she wanted a room where we could both work side by side. "No more mine and yours," she told me one evening while we stood in the bare-stud kitchen eating takeout from the carton. "I want this place to feel like us." But even in those early months, something small kept catching in the gears. She would thank me warmly in private, then get strangely precise in public. If a neighbor complimented the progress, she'd smile and say, "I've been pouring so much into this house." If her sister asked about the new flooring, Rebecca would laugh and answer, "Homeownership never ends." Once, at a cookout in her cousin's backyard, a man asked whether we planned to refinance after the improvements. By the time the walls were painted, I had nowhere left to put my own books. The den smelled like fresh latex paint and cut oak, clean and sharp, the kind of smell that should have meant a job finished right. Morning light came through the new double-pane windows and flat white bands across the floor, hitting the shelves I had measured, ordered, and installed myself. Rebecca stood in the doorway with a throw pillow tucked under one arm, studying the room with that narrowed look she used when she had already decided something before speaking. "I think your desk should go downstairs," she said. "This room feels better as a reading space." I set the drill down on the built-in bench and stared at her. "You said this was going to be our office." "Plans change," she said, already turning the pillow over to inspect the seam. "Besides, you're on calls all day. The basement makes more sense." The basement. Concrete floor, low ceiling, one small window near the furnace. I could already smell the damp cardboard and old paint cans. I laughed once, short and dry, because I thought she had to be kidding. She wasn't. Over the next few weeks, her little adjustments hardened into rules. My jackets disappeared from the front hall and showed up on a hook by the laundry room. My coffee grinder was moved from the kitchen counter because it looked cluttered. The framed photo of me and my father on a salmon boat, the one I had kept on every desk since I was 23, vanished from the den shelf and reappeared in a drawer beside spare batteries and twist ties. Every time I put something back, Rebecca found a way to move it again with that same smooth voice, never quite loud, never quite apologizing. "It's just a better flow. I'm trying to keep the house cohesive. You get defensive over the weirdest things." The house got quieter as it got more finished. Soft close cabinets, New insulation in the walls, rugs that muted footsteps. But inside that quiet, I started hearing exactly where I stood. One Saturday, I came home from a supply run with window trim in the truck bed and found Rebecca's friends in the kitchen drinking sparkling water out of stemless glasses. Lemon peels sat on the cutting board. A candle with a vanilla scent burned near the sink I had paid to replace. Rebecca was showing them the pantry pullouts and the under-cabinet lighting. I came in carrying 2 boxes, shoulders tight from the weight, and one of her friends smiled at me and said, "Wow, you've been busy helping." Helping? Rebecca didn't correct her. She smiled and said, "He's handy when he wants to be." I set the boxes down more carefully than I needed to. The cardboard scraped against the hardwood. My name is Ethan Carter, and I remember stupid details when something matters. The silver ring mark under Rebecca's glass, the whisper of recessed lights overhead, the way my shirt stuck between my shoulder blades. I waited for her to say more. She didn't. That night, I asked her why she kept talking like I was some extra pair of hands instead of her husband. She stood at the bathroom vanity removing her earrings, one by one, tiny clicks on the quartz counter I had chosen with her. "You're overreacting," she said. "No, I'm paying attention." The smell of seared steak and rosemary hung low over the dining room, rich enough to make the air feel heavy. Silverware tapped against plates, ice shifted in glasses, and laughter kept bouncing off the framed photos Rebecca had lined along the wall like proof of a polished life. I sat at the far end of the table with my napkin folded once across my lap, watching candlelight skate over the wine in her friends' glasses. Rebecca had invited her sister Dana, Dana's husband Mark, and a couple from her office I'd only met twice. The house looked warm that night. The pendant lights threw amber circles over the table, the hardwood floors caught a soft glow, and every surface I had sanded, carried, measured, or paid for seemed to gleam a little too proudly under her hosting smile. I tried to settle into the evening. I really did. For the first half hour, I stayed useful. I brought out the roasted potatoes, topped off water glasses, found an extra corkscrew when Mark dropped the first one under a chair. Rebecca was smooth, quick, bright in that way she got when there was an audience. She kept one hand looped around the stem of her glass and the other moving through the air as she talked, narrating paint colors, cabinet pulls, where she found the runner in the hallway. Every time someone praised the place, her chin lifted just slightly. "It came together beautifully," Dana said, looking toward the kitchen. Rebecca smiled. I had a vision. I felt my jaw tighten once, then release. That still might have been survivable. Then Mark wandered into the den and called out, "This room used to be dead space, right?" Rebecca laughed from the table. "Oh, completely. I finally figured out how to make it functional." Finally. The word landed like a tack under my skin. I could hear the vent humming above the stove, the faint hiss of butter cooling in the pan I hadn't washed yet. I stayed where I was. I told myself not every omission was a betrayal. I told myself not every bruise had to be pressed. But dinner moved on, and the little cuts kept coming. Her co-worker Amy asked where I worked from now that the den was so beautifully reclaimed. Rebecca took a sip of wine before I could answer. "He makes do," she said. "We all have to adapt when space matters." Amy gave a polite little smile, not knowing what to do with that. I looked at Rebecca. She didn't look back. My fork felt slick in my hand. The room had gotten hotter, or maybe it was just me. Then Dana, trying to keep things easy, said, "At least doing all these upgrades together must have brought you two closer." Rebecca let out a short laugh through her nose. "Upgrades are expensive. Let's just say I learned exactly who understands what ownership means." The table went still in that subtle way people go still when they're pretending they didn't hear the blade come out. Mark lowered his glass. Amy glanced at her husband. I set my fork down carefully beside the plate so it wouldn't clatter. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. Rebecca turned toward me at last, and there was no softness in her face. Her smile stayed, but only at the edges. "It means," she said, loud enough for everyone, "this is my house." The windshield kept catching the glow of streetlights in long yellow smears, then throwing them off into black glass again. Cold air leaked through the driver's side seal with a faint whistle, and the steering wheel stayed hard beneath my palms no matter how long I drove without deciding where I was going. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store 3 miles away, under a buzzing light that made everything look drained and pale. I turned the engine off and sat there while the hood ticked softly in the dark. My phone lit up twice on the center console. Rebecca. Then Rebecca again. I let both calls die. A text came in after that. Don't do this tonight. Another followed before I had even unlocked the screen. You embarrassed me by walking out. I stared at that one until the words seemed to flatten into pure shape. Not what I heard. Not what she said. Not what she did. What I had done to her by refusing to stay in my chair and absorb it quietly. I drove back an hour later, not because I was ready to talk, but because I needed to see the house when no one was performing inside it. By then the guests were gone. The driveway was empty except for Rebecca's SUV, beaded with dew under the porch light. Inside, the house smelled like cooled food, candle wax, and dishwasher steam. A half-full wine glass sat on the dining table beside a folded napkin with lipstick pressed into the cloth. Rebecca wasn't downstairs. I could hear drawers opening and closing overhead, quick and irritated. I didn't call out. Instead, I moved through the room slowly, the way a stranger might walk through a model home and notice which details were for show. In the den, the built-ins I had installed looked almost theatrical now, lined with Rebecca's designed books, ceramic vases, framed prints, everything arranged to imply she had authored the entire space alone. My 2 storage boxes were still in the hall closet where she had told me they were less visually disruptive. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator and found the takeout menus, spare batteries, and a stack of business cards from contractors. On top sat one of Rebecca's friend's thank you notes from a housewarming lunch she hosted 2 weeks earlier while I was at work. The card was still open. Your home is gorgeous, Becca. You've done such an incredible job making it yours. I put it back exactly where I found it. Upstairs, Rebecca was on the phone in the bedroom with the door cracked 2 inches. Her voice came through low at first, then sharpened. He's being sensitive because he threw money at a project and thinks that means something legally or emotionally. A pause. No, it wasn't that much. Not compared to what the house actually is. My hand tightened on the banister so hard the edge pressed into my skin. The hallway lamp threw a weak gold strip across the carpet, and I stood just outside that light, hearing my marriage translated into a story I no longer recognized. I'm not saying he never helped, she said. I'm saying he acts like he built the place. Another pause, then a laugh. Small. Dry. Please. He likes to martyr himself. I stepped back before the floorboard near the bedroom could creak. The refrigerator hummed against the kitchen silence, low and steady, while the clock over the stove clicked its way toward 3 in the morning. A strip of under-cabinet light cut across the quartz like a blade, catching dust, fingerprints, and the edge of a yellow legal pad I hadn't touched in months. I stood there in my socks, feeling the cold from the tile creep through the fabric, and for the first time since Rebecca said those words, I wanted numbers more than I wanted sleep. The house still smelled faintly like rosemary and lemon cleaner from dinner, but underneath that there was drywall dust trapped in the vents, old paint, the dry paper smell of receipts. I opened the drawer beside the fridge and found the file folder where I kept tax forms and insurance cards. Then I pulled out my laptop, set it on the island, and started rebuilding the part of the story she had tried to erase. My checking account showed the first transfer in March, $20,000 to the contractor's business account, with the confirmation email still sitting in my inbox. Then another 8 for the kitchen cabinets, 14 for labor and flooring. Smaller charges after that, lighting, plumbing fixtures, permits, trim, the custom shelves for the office she later said had never really been mine. The screen threw a pale blue light across my hands while I matched every debit to an invoice, every invoice to a text, every text to a memory I suddenly hated having. We're building our future, babe. That was one of hers. I found it at 3:17 a.m., sent with a photo of paint swatches spread over this same counter. Another one came 2 weeks later after I hesitated over the cost of replacing the old windows. I know it's a lot, but it'll be worth it for us. For us. I said the words out loud, quiet enough that they vanished into the vent noise. By 4:30, I had the legal pad covered in dates, amounts, and little arrows connecting one promise to another. It wasn't a courtroom brief. It was worse. It was a marriage laid flat under fluorescent light. At sunrise, I drove to the bank downtown. The lobby smelled like carpet shampoo and burnt coffee, and the teller window glass reflected a face I barely recognized. Rough stubble, red eyes, shirt wrinkled from sleeping nowhere. I asked for archived statements going back 18 months. The woman at the desk, a silver-haired manager named Denise, printed them in neat stacks and clipped them together while the printer kicked and whined behind her. Home renovation? She asked, looking at the volume. Something like that, I said. Back in my truck, I spread everything across the passenger seat. Receipts slid against one another every time I turned, crisp paper whispering over paper like somebody talking behind a closed door. I stopped at a hardware store parking lot and searched my email again, this time for the contractor. He had sent every estimate to both of us. Both names, both signatures on the change orders. I found pictures too, studs exposed in the walls, the kitchen gutted to bare framing, me carrying boxes through a cloud of plaster dust, Rebecca smiling in a paper mask and giving a thumbs up beside the demolished backsplash. She had documented the whole thing like a celebration. Rain tapped against the office window in a thin, uneven pattern, soft at first, then hard enough to blur the parking lot lights into trembling white stains. The coffee in the break room pot had gone bitter hours earlier, and the air around my desk carried that burnt smell mixed with warm toner from the printer. I had been staring at the same spreadsheet for 10 minutes without seeing it when my phone buzzed again, this time with my brother's name on the screen. Caleb never called before dinner unless something mattered. I let it ring once more than I should have, then answered. "You sound like hell," he said. No greeting. Just that. I leaned back in my chair and watched rain snake down the glass. Been a long couple of days. Mom said Rebecca canceled on Sunday lunch. Said you two were sorting out house stress. He paused, then added, "That doesn't sound like your phrase." A laugh almost came out, but it died halfway. "No," I said. "It doesn't." Caleb stayed quiet long enough for me to hear dishes clattering somewhere in the background at his place, one of his kids asking for something, a cabinet closing. He had always known when to leave a door open without forcing me through it. So I told him, not everything at once. First the dinner, then the line, then the call I overheard in the hallway, the dry little laugh, the word martyr. By the time I got to the folder on my desktop and the stack of statements in my bag, my throat had gone tight from saying facts out loud that I had tried to survive in silence. When I finished, there was no instant advice, just breathing on the other end. "Ethan," he said finally, "that's not one bad argument." Rain rattled harder against the window. "I know. No, I mean it. That's not a fight about a house. That's somebody shrinking you in your own life and making you help with it." I rubbed my thumb over the edge of a paper clip until the metal bent. I keep thinking maybe I should have pushed back earlier. Maybe I let it get here. "Maybe," he said, and I almost braced for blame. But then his voice lowered. "Or maybe you were trying to keep your marriage steady while she kept moving the line." The fluorescent light above me buzzed faintly. My shoulders dropped before I realized they'd been locked up all day. Caleb asked where I was. I told him. 40 minutes later, he walked into my office carrying 2 takeout containers in a cardboard tray and smelling like wet denim, cold air, and the garlic fries from the diner off Route 8. He kicked the door shut behind him with his boot and looked at the stacks of paper spread across my desk. "Damn," he said softly. Not at the money. At the effort. At the fact that I had needed this much proof just to defend my own memory. We ate out of plastic containers with the steam fogging my glasses while I showed him the transfers, the texts, the contractor emails. He read slowly, jaw tightening a little more each time Rebecca used words like our and together and home. When he finished, he set the last page down flat. "You need 2 things," he said. "A line and a future." I looked at him across the desk. The copy machine spat out page after page with a dry plastic heat, each sheet landing in the tray with a sharp little slap that sounded louder than it should have in the empty office. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flat and cold, and the smell of toners sat in the back of my throat. I stared at the stack until the final page slid free, then squared the corners with both hands like I was lining up something heavier than paper. Marcus was still by the desk, sleeves rolled up, takeout container open but forgotten. "A line," he repeated, tapping the packet with one finger. "And a future." I nodded once. By the time I left that office, I knew what my line was. I wasn't going back into that house like a guest asking permission to stand in the kitchen I had paid to rebuild. I drove home under a low ceiling of clouds, the road still wet enough to throw silver reflections under every street lamp. The wipers clicked twice across a windshield that no longer needed them. In the passenger seat sat a clean binder, 3 tabbed sections, and a manila envelope with copies of every transfer, every receipt, every signed change order, every text where Rebecca had said our house, our plans, our future. Not proof for an argument. Proof for a boundary. The porch light was on when I pulled in. Warm yellow spilled across the steps and caught the new black hardware on the front door, the set I had picked because she said it made the place look solid. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the cedar diffuser she kept on the console table. A bowl sat centered beneath the mirror exactly where she liked it. Everything looked composed, curated, like no one had ever raised a voice under that roof. Rebecca was in the den with her laptop open and a blanket folded over her legs, the TV on mute, blue light moving across her face. She looked up when I stepped in, then at the binder in my hand. "What is that?" she asked. "No hello. No where were you? Just that." I set my keys down on the entry table, slow enough to hear the metal click against wood. "It's the point where this stops being whatever version of me you've been counting on." Her mouth tightened. "I'm not doing drama tonight. Neither am I." I walked past her into the kitchen, opened the binder on the island, and laid out the first sheet under the pendant lights. Transfer dates, amounts, contractor invoices. Her signature beside mine on the change orders. The quartz felt cool under my palm. "You keep saying I'm overreacting. You keep acting like I dropped a lamp in the corner and called it contribution. I put $50,000 into this house. Not into an idea. Not into your mood. Into lumber, labor, permits, electrical, plumbing, stone, fixtures, paint." She gave a short laugh with no humor in it and stood up. "If this is your way of trying to claim ownership, save it. The deed is in my name." "I know exactly whose name is on the deed," I said. "That's why I'm not here to claim your title. I'm here to claim my line." She folded her arms. I could hear the refrigerator hum behind us and the soft tick of the dimmer in the dining room. Ice clicked against the side of Rebecca's glass when she picked it up, then set it back down untouched. The sound was small, but in the kitchen it carried like a warning. The vent kept breathing overhead, steady and indifferent, stirring the scent of lemon oil from the cabinets, and something faintly scorched from the pan she must have left too long on the stove earlier. She stayed on the far side of the island for a few seconds after I said it. One hand braced against the counter's edge, the apartment application and reimbursement letter spread in front of her like documents she refused to recognize as real. Then she straightened and reached for the binder. "Let me see what you think is so devastating," she said. I didn't stop her. That was the point now. No raised voices. No vague accusation she could wave off. Just paper, dates, numbers, her own handwriting, and the shape of a lie collapsing under its own weight. She flipped through the first section fast, irritation making the pages snap. Bank transfers, contractor invoices, flooring deposit, plumbing fixtures, permit fees. Her eyes slowed at the signed change orders. Both names. Same pen. Same day. I watched her thumb hesitate over the photo of the kitchen stripped to studs, me in a dust mask carrying demo bags while she stood behind me with a measuring tape looped over one shoulder, smiling at the camera. "This doesn't mean what you think it means," she said, but there was less steel in it now. "Then tell me what it means," I said. The under-cabinet light caught the side of the mixer I'd bought her 2 Christmases ago, throwing a dull silver stripe across the counter. "Because from where I'm standing, it means I financed half the life you've been presenting as solely yours." She shut the binder hard. "It was my house before you. That hasn't changed." "The deed hasn't changed," I said. "Neither has the wiring we paid to replace, the roof patch, the kitchen, the flooring, the labor. What changed is the story you started telling once the dust settled." Her nostrils flared. "You're making this ugly. It got ugly when you decided public humiliation was clearer than private honesty." She looked past me toward the den, toward the couch, toward the soft lamp glow and the framed photos on the wall. The house had that evening hush expensive places get when every surface is meant to signal calm. It almost worked. "So what? You want a thank you parade?" she said. "A plaque in the hallway?" I shook my head. "I wanted a wife who didn't reduce me to a renter in front of people we know." She opened her mouth, then closed it, and I saw the calculation move behind her eyes. "Change the subject. Minimize the amount. Rewrite the tone. Make me look unstable." She had used all of those before. This time there was too much paper on the counter for any of it to float. She grabbed the reimbursement letter and skimmed it, her fingernail tapping once against the amount. This is insane. 50,000. You think I can just hand you a check because your feelings are hurt? My feelings are not the number on that page. I slid the last tab in the binder toward her and opened it myself. Printed screenshots. Text messages. Her words in gray and blue bubbles. The air in the kitchen had gone stale from sitting too long over old arguments, cold coffee, and fresh paper. Under the pendant light, every page looked harsher than it had in my office. White, flat, undeniable. Rebecca's thumb held the corner of one screenshot while the rest of the stack bent in her hand, and I watched her eyes move over her own words. He paid for some of it. It was mostly cosmetic. The place was mine before him, and it'll be mine after. The ice in her glass had already melted into a thin ring of water on the wood. For the first time that night, she didn't have a quick reply. She looked up at me, then back down, and I could see her trying to decide which version of herself she wanted to save. I was venting, she said at last. Her voice had lost that public edge, the sharp one she used when she wanted a room to agree with her. People say things when they're angry. Not that many things, I said. Not that consistently. The house was quiet around us in that tense, mechanical way houses get at night. The refrigerator motor cycling on, the dimmer ticking in the dining room, rainwater slipping through the gutter outside. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. She set the papers down harder than necessary and crossed her arms. So what, Ethan? What exactly do you want? A thank you note? A plaque? No. I pulled the reimbursement letter back toward me, flattened the page with my palm, and slid a second envelope onto the counter. Cream paper. Attorney letterhead. Her face changed before she even opened it. What is this? It's the next step. She unfolded the letter, and I gave her the silence to read it. Partition action wasn't possible because the title was hers before the marriage, but the attorney had laid out the rest cleanly. A formal demand for reimbursement of documented marital contributions, notice of my intent to file and divorce, and a request to preserve all communications and financial records related to the renovation. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just real. Rebecca looked at me like I'd spoken in a language she had never expected me to learn. You went to a lawyer. Yes. Over this. Her hand swept toward the room, the cabinets, the counters, the floors we'd chosen together. Over being erased while paying to build someone else's certainty. Her mouth tightened. You are blowing up a marriage over $50,000. No, I said. The money just made the lesson expensive. That landed. I saw it in the way her shoulders shifted, small but visible, like something internal had finally taken weight. She turned away from me, pacing once toward the sink, then back, bare feet silent on the tile I had paid to replace. You're really doing this, she said. It wasn't a question anymore. Yes. And if I write you a check? The words came out fast, almost irritated, as if efficiency could still put her back in control. If I pay it, then what? You want your line item balanced, and we pretend this never happened. I looked at her across the counter where we had once stood shoulder to shoulder picking hardware finishes from a catalog. Brass or matte black, warm white or soft daylight. We had treated decisions like promises back then.